Yes, I know I'm a minute late, or maybe not necessarily a minute late, less than a minute late, but I am late. So I apologize. I was about to turn the camera on and I looked at my hair and I was like, oh my gosh, what did I do? And frankly, the hair doesn't look too much better now. But here we are, Unfound Live for February. What is today? February 9th of 2026. And that means when the next episode comes out on Friday, it's going to be Friday the 13th. So there's that. Hope everybody had a great week. I did. Really good week. I'm going to tell you about it here in a little bit. I have a fantastic show lined up for all of you, of course. And you can see what the items covered will be tonight. Probably, you're looking at Nancy Guthrie and you're thinking, well, we know who she is. A woman who was surely unknown 2 weeks ago. Everybody knows who she is now. And there's more to talk about. So I'm going to do that. But you may be looking at the other two names in the title for the live show tonight and wondering, well, those two are not familiar to me. Well, Anthony Fox, that is the disappearance that I will analyze tonight. But the other, the woman, Virginia Piper, you may be wondering, well, what's up with her? Well, what I did this past week, I don't know how many other people do this. I don't know how many true crime people, reporters, hosts, podcasters, whoever do this, but to learn more, a little bit more about abductions that are possibly ransom situations, I decided to look that up. And to see if Nancy Guthrie's disappearance is similar to abductions of people, seeming abductions, well, they were abductions, and the ransoms that were demanded in those. And I wanted to see if we could just find any similarities between any of them and what has gone on with Nancy Guthrie's disappearance over the last how many days? Over a week now. And we're going to use Virginia Piper's as an example because she was 72 years old when she was abducted for ransom. Or no, she was a little younger than that. But she was abducted for ransom. And she was eventually found alive. And the ransom was paid. And I'm going to get into all of that. So we're going to try to see, does Virginia Piper's abduction ransom demand seem similar to what is going on with Nancy Guthrie? Just keeping in mind that Virginia Piper, this all happened back in 1972, and it does have some historical significance. So it's just not the kidnapping of a woman and her being returned alive. There was it was tangentially connected to one of the biggest scandals in American history. So we'll come back to that. So that is what is on the agenda tonight. And maybe I'll get to a few other things. But as I always say, whatever is in the title is guaranteed to be featured over the next 2 hours. And of course, before we're done, I will tell you about this Friday's episode. It is going to be a 3-parter. So all coming out on the same day. Unlike other podcasts, YouTube shows, whatever out there, they kind of spread them out. Part 1 this week, part 2 next week, part 3. That's not what I do. All the parts come out in the same day. And there are reasons that I do that, but that's not important. So there you go. As you are watching tonight, please give this show a thumbs up. Please subscribe to the channel, Unfound Podcast. YouTube channel right down there in the bottom right-hand corner. Please share it. If there's anybody in your circle that you think would enjoy this YouTube channel, find it informative, all the different kinds of videos, content that you can find here, please tell them about it. And there are a variety of ways you can support what we do here at Unfound. Patreon.com/Unfound podcast. PayPal.me/Unfound podcast. You can, as you are watching tonight on February 9th, you can hit the super chat button. You can contribute that way. And then if you are watching on YouTube tonight, hit the join button below. So there are a variety of ways you can show support for the work that is done here. So what has gone on since all of us got together? We had a pretty good trivia week. Could have been even better. On last Wednesday and then on Saturday, both teams, both totally different people except for myself, both teams came in second place. And certainly last Wednesday, things just gone a little differently. We could have come in first. And certainly on Saturday, we kind of let it slip through our fingers, to be honest. I was to blame for at least part of that. I'll take my blame. But the margin of error is so thin. Very competitive. We lost by 1 point, and the points, like they had like 128 points. We had 127 or whatever it was. But a lot of points can be accumulated from round to round. And usually the amount of points that we got is good enough to win. And like I said, we kind of blew it. So we could have had a big, big night. And it just kind of slipped through our fingers. Now, granted, there were only 3 of us there on Saturday night. We played against the team that beat us by 1 point had like 12 people on their team. So they had a distinct advantage, and still we only lost by a point. So maybe we can delight in that. But you know me, I'm very competitive and everything, and certainly enjoy playing trivia with these people. It was me, guy's name is Dan, and his wife Angie, just the 3 of us. And like I said, just kind of retrospect, if you remember, we won a week ago, and we should have followed it up with another one. So 2 weeks in a row just got away from us. But it was a good time. And my trivia team on Wednesday, we moved up to 6th place overall. We have to keep that going to make sure to get into the top 5 by the end of the season, which will be at the end of March. So we still have a ways to go, a long way to go. In other news, of course, the Super Bowl yesterday. Did watch it. Watched the first half. They had a party in my building. Watched the first half down there. And then I came up here and had unfound work to do, including putting the show together. So I did that during the second half. I found it to be a boring game. Really wasn't rooting for either team. Although if you really, really had to push me, I didn't want the Patriots to win, to get 7 Super Bowl wins, because that would then be more than my Steelers. So there's that. So I was not upset that the Seahawks won, but really emotionally not invested at all. Don't ask me about the halftime show. I have no idea. I didn't watch, which is not unusual for me. I know all the hubbub and the political comments and all that out there. You know me. I ignore all of it. I really don't care one way or the other what's on at halftime. The only way I would care if it were Iron Maiden or some of the bands, bands that are still touring, but of course they're not going to get asked, just not, just not fashionable, I guess, these days to the demographic that the NFL wants. And you know what? I'm fine with that. I don't, I don't do audience surveys on what kind of music I should be listening to and everything. So I really didn't care. But I should tell you, though, we had this party in my building. I would say there were maybe 40 people there. It was a nice showing. And there was a lot of food there. And I would say that the first time since I started my diet going back to like let's just say the beginning of January, maybe late December, somewhere in there, I had a cheat day. And it was a cheat day for, like the Guinness Book World Records of cheat days. But the good thing was, though, I ate, but I didn't feel, overtly, it wasn't like Thanksgiving and you can hardly move and you feel like you're going to throw up. I ate a lot, but my body handled it pretty well. So probably that meant I was at a severe calorie deficit. Anyway, kind of ate. I went back for seconds and then some, and I had dessert. And still, my body was just not, did not really register it, very much. And the food was good. I brought food myself. I brought a shrimp. Cocktail shrimp, one of those circular things, the shrimps around the outside and the cocktail sauce is in the middle. And I also brought some potato chips. But we had, pulled pork. We had chicken wings. We had, the traditional like Subway sandwiches, platter sandwiches. Of course, like pasta of one type or another. We had, there was a lot of different stuff. They had grape leaves with the rice and stuff inside. Oh, I love those. Oh my goodness. I had a few of those. So it was a lot of great food, probably the best food that I've had at a party in quite a while. So I salute all of those people. And I sat with some people and we did end up having a pretty decent in-depth conversation about Nancy Guthrie. These, it's in the news and none of these people knew what I do until they actually asked me what, because I really didn't know these people. And, so I just let my insight into it, of course, doing this for 9.5 years. And, I had to tell them I've been on TV and been to universities and testified in a murder trial. And of course, they were all like, wow, okay. Well, we're going to talk about Nancy Guthrie. And then what do you know? We got this missing persons guy at our table. Imagine that. So they must have thought that was a little weird, especially, I guess I don't look like that type. But it was good. We had a good quality conversation. Nobody was, no kooks at the table or anything like that where I had to like get up and leave. So that was fine. So that's what went on for the Super Bowl, the party and everything. And then what else has gone on with me since last week? Talked to Dad today. He's doing good. He didn't watch the Super Bowl, which doesn't surprise me at all. And I still haven't bought a car yet. Though I will tell you a story, kinda. I did have 2 cars checked out. They're too far away for me to go and look at them. And one was in North Carolina. The other was in West Virginia. And I had independent technicians. You can go online, hire people to do this. And they went and checked these cars out. And neither of them were up to my standards. For different reasons, though. The one in North Carolina, I think it looked good in the pictures. It got very high scores mechanically. But it had been wrecked a couple times, and I'm not overtly crazy about that as long as the repairs are done well. Of course, my car has damage from a hurricane. It was technically Milton that did that. And so I get it. You have a car 12, 13 years. If you're driving it, things happen. It's just what kind of work is done, putting it back together. And it just seems that whoever owned this car whoever did it kind of half-assed it. So why that would happen, I don't know. Why you would go kind of not get the best place, or or whatever did happen, I don't know. But just didn't seem like it was going to be up to my standards, even though I understand there's going to be, things maybe replaced and everything. And then today I had another car looked at. And the big problem was the weather wasn't that great, but I didn't even need to hear that. The issue was that when the tech started playing around with the air conditioning heater controls and everything, there was a bunch of clicking going on inside the dash. And that's a big no-no. That means that the mechanism that moves the doors, whether it's defroster or on the floor or out the vents or whatever, is not working. And if you don't know, that can be big, big bucks on any type of car, whether it's a Mustang or a Honda, Toyota, whatever. It can be big bucks because you got to take the dash off, and it's labor intensive. The parts aren't that expensive, but labor intensive. And so right away, out. I didn't even need to hear anything about the mechanical, how it drove and everything. Seemed like the car otherwise was in pretty decent shape. So if you could have combined how the car in the other state looked with the mechanicals of the one in North Carolina, I think you put those two cars together, you got a fantastic purchase. But unfortunately, that was not the case. So I'm still looking. However, I did look at a car locally on Saturday, and it was nice. It was nice. I went for a ride in it. I did not drive it, simply because it was very busy, and I haven't driven a stick for a while, and it's this woman's car, and I had visions of me popping the clutch and stalling and us getting hit or something like that. Totally fine. She could drive, and we certainly went for a ride. But my thing is I don't make fast decisions on anything. I don't make emotional decisions. And certainly over the last couple months, with me being disciplined about my diet and a lot of other things going on, even with this past podcast from this Friday and talking about how I've been viewing things and everything, I don't make emotional decisions. It's a beautiful car. Beautiful. I think that it has been well maintained, even though it has been road raced. But there was no way I was buying then, because once again, I was getting a car looked at today, and I don't buy things at first sight. Nothing. I don't make emotional decisions. Not that I don't make wrong decisions over my life, but I don't make quick decisions. I think things out. Even the car that I have now, the Sonata, that was a thought process. So, but I think maybe, possibly, I could be wrong, I think that car has been sold. Maybe not. So I'll just keep looking. But once again, not in a rush. As I told a buddy of mine today, if this means I have to Uber or Lyft for a year, fine by me. I don't care. So whereas, a lot of other people, when they get wrapped up and, they get so excited and everything else, that's just not me. I'll get excited after I purchase it, not before. Not before. Just like I did with the Sonata. But we certainly went for a ride on Saturday. That car was fast. And it had some modifications done to it and everything. But yeah, it was a serious machine. And I appreciate the woman who owns it taking me for a ride. She could really drive. And we had a good time while it lasted. But certainly she would have liked me to just probably buy it right there. I don't know how many people have been interested in it, but that wasn't happening. So I've still not bought a car. I'm going to continue to be patient, even though I've sunk a bit of money so far, getting some particular cars looked at because I can't be there, and buying some Carfax reports or Carfax reports. Yeah. And doing those things. I've spent some money doing this, but I think it's worth it, trying to, track down the right car. It's very easy to make a bad decision. These are Mustangs, so some of them are going to have modifications. Some of them have been driven hard and all of this stuff. If I was looking at another Hyundai Sonata, or I was looking at I don't even know what or a Kia sedan, with 30 or 40,000 miles on it, it probably would not be as big a deal. I'd probably be more open-minded and maybe not as hardcore on being very logical about it, because once again, the odds of those cars being hammered and all those things being driven hard, not probably very likely. With Mustangs, you got to watch out. Just though different if it were a Corvette or a Camaro or the Dodge Challengers, any of these sports cars, BMWs, you have to make a very logical decision with them, even though those are the kind of cars that people get excited about the most. That's just the way it is. So I'll let you know how it's going, but I'm still driving the Hyundai and not driving it very much. All right. So let's see who is in here. Charlie, good to see you. I know your parents went to Egypt, right? Right. LaFord, look at you. How you doing tonight? Mary, Amy, Lisa. Hello, Lisa. What's going on? Paula. Hello, Fishing, checking in. Thank you for checking in. The Cake, what's up? LaFord, I pray for Nancy. Yeah, Guthrie. Yeah, no matter what happened, yeah, it's something. D, we just had an explosion here in Oklahoma at the refinery by my house. Did you hear it, D? I love the halftime show. I don't understand why. Let's not get into that, Lisa. D says she knew Seattle was going to win. It was about 5 p.m. Hello, Holly. What's going on? Hi, Ed from Holly. Hello, Holly. Hello, Haley. What's going on with you? We just had another small one. I'm setting back out. It's about a mile. Another explosion. Oh, my goodness. Yeah. Yeah, cruise up the Nile. That sounds like a good time. Them and I guess Agatha Christie, right, Charlie? Okay. All right, so let's get into tonight's content. And I'll just start with Nancy Guthrie. I know maybe a lot of people, see that in the title. Maybe some people have just been doing a search and said, oh, this guy, I don't even know who this guy is. I've never heard of Unfound, but he says he's going to be talking about tonight. Well, I will do that right now. And then I'll go into talking about Virginia Piper's abduction and ransom demands going back to the early 70s. And let's see what we can learn from all of this. What can we figure out here? What seems most likely? Now, of course, she is still missing. Despite all of the coverage over the past week, I would not say that any overt information has been released. I think that we've just gotten some clarifications on things. And certainly there has been somebody that's been charged with faking like they took Nancy in an effort to get money. And we've learned more about the timeline and this, this Ring camera that was disconnected at a particular time. And then about this, heart monitor that she had that went offline at a certain time, kind of reminding us of Thomas Doolin on a disappearance we covered just within the last month. How weird is that? We go like 9.5 years without ever talking about something like that. Then we have Thomas Doolin's disappearance. And now we have Nancy Guthrie's like with heart monitors and Wi-Fi and everything. It's so not something you would predict. But, we have the droplets of blood. And, there's a story out there with somebody in her yard, in the days and weeks leading up to it. There's a story out there that the police or the FBI or somebody took something electronic off the roof of her house. Was it a camera? Was somebody like spying on her or something? All of these additional stories, but I don't think it's really narrowed down the choices at this point. I don't think that everything has given us a lot of clarity. I don't know how many choices there exactly are, but we're certainly not down to two choices, of what could have happened. I think that we're still at 3 or 4 or 5. And with some of Unfound's disappearances, that's kind of, where we are. We might even say that even though we might all, for example, have our own attitude toward Brian Schaefer, but really the facts, you could be open to multiple stories. And so with Nancy Guthrie's, it's kind of the same thing. We have a set of facts. Of course, the law enforcement knows more than we do. And so we're, here we're out here trying to figure out for ourselves, at least the public information. I still think that factually, I don't know how the percentages all, come out, but there's still a lot of different possibilities here. A lot of different, but what I find funny about this, this happened during COVID. This happens with so many things these days, is suddenly everybody becomes an expert. During COVID, everybody, even though they didn't have a medical degree, failed chemistry, failed biology, suddenly everybody's a COVID expert. We all know what I'm talking about. And it seems now with, everybody's become a kidnapping expert. Everybody's become a ransom note expert. Meanwhile, most people have never read anything about any kidnapping. And surely nobody has ever personally seen a ransom note up close. In fact, probably, at least in recent American history, probably the most famous ransom note was the one for John Benet Ramsey. And that wasn't even a real ransom note. So it's been kind of funny. It's not funny. It's serious. It's darkly humorous, I guess. But to kind of sit back, kind of suddenly the public is coming into my realm, or if I can say our realm, and you're making a lot of declarations and everything. And it's obvious that a lot of these people, not just, your average person on the street, but all the commentators, pick a news, they don't know what they're talking about either. And a lot of people going on and, giving their opinions, their talking heads, they're on the TV, so they feel that they have to say something. Guys, it's okay to say nothing because you don't know anything about it. It's okay to say nothing. Like I said on Jason Blair's show this past August, better to keep your mouth shut and people think you're an idiot than to open it and remove no doubt. Whereas this is my realm. This is, Julia Cowley's realm. This is John Lorden's realm. This is, a lot of people who, take this stuff seriously and trying to get it right. In contrast to people who are just out there, well, I have to say something. Doesn't matter. Nobody's going to hold anything against me if I'm wrong, which is a horrible way to cover news. So there's all that. These are things that have been going through my head. D, do you think it was her daughter and her husband, also known as the boyfriend? Nothing that once again, I don't know any more than any of you do. I'm not particularly leaning in that direction, D, from what I can see. We have to start thinking about, well, why would this other daughter do it? Why would her husband do it? What exactly was the plan with this? They went out to dinner earlier. And, so It could, I mean, I guess there's no facts to dispute that. But what exactly then are we thinking here? Did did Nancy tick them so badly off that what do we, if anybody can come up with any sort of idea, then what exactly are you thinking? Then you got to give me something. You got to give me something. And that's where I think the son-in-law and everything, I think that's where it gets very fuzzy, at least my thinking on it. But I don't know anything about their family, as most people do not. So it's weird to me, people pointing the finger at the other daughter and her husband. You don't even know these people. I mean, what are you doing? You never even thought of them until a week ago. Now you're making pronouncements. It's, what I will say is, this is not striking me, and I'll get into this when it comes to Virginia Piper. This far in is not striking me as a very, some sophisticated plan. If the idea is to take an 84-year-old, you could take her anytime. When you think about somebody going into somebody's house at 2 a.m. or 3 a.m, what that tells me is you need the element of surprise, like the original Night Stalker had. You need to go in there into the cover of night and do the things that you're going to do. Whereas if you just do it in the evening or when they're home, of course, it's light out. Of course, a lot of crimes happen during the day too. But this strikes me as some sort of, element of surprise and everything. And you need to surprise an 84-year-old to abduct her. She's, 84-year-old. I mean, how could she defend herself? It's just not striking me as very sophisticated. I would also say that given that, this bell camera was unhooked or something, and then of course the heart monitor went off like many minutes later, not an hour later, but many minutes later. This strikes me as probably some younger person that did this. I suppose it could be somebody my age, like a Gen Xer, but somebody that would think of that probably is on the younger side of things. I can't see a 70-year-old going into the house and I got to disconnect that ring bell. It just seems unlikely to me. We also have to remember, as much as has been made about this ransom demand, the latest news, and I just checked this like an hour ago, the FBI isn't sure at all that any of these ransom demands are real. Even though this has been made out to be a kidnapping with a ransom demand, there is no verification on that. And something, once again, I looked at the kidnapping and ransom demand for, I don't know if you knew this, but Frank Sinatra's son was kidnapped for a ransom. And then we have Virginia Piper. Of course, there have been others. Usually when people get kidnapped for purposes of a ransom demand, the kidnapper or kidnappers really want to make it sure that authorities or the family, whoever knows, yeah, this is really us. Because why? Because, yeah, I mean, even all of us who would never kidnap anybody, we understand that all the kooks can come out of the woodwork, as has happened. Somebody's already been charged with being, doing this and trying to get money out of it when they're not responsible. And I'm not hearing that. Maybe it's true. Maybe that's something that's being withheld from us. But I'm not hearing that. If you're a kidnapper and you really want to make sure that they take you seriously and you think that you can get away with this and you're going to get millions of dollars or Bitcoin, or I'll get to the Bitcoin in a minute. But, you're going to take a picture of her. You're going to put it in a little envelope. You're going to put it out somewhere. You're going to call a number or something or something. Hey, this is proof that we ever go there, find that, and you'll have your proof that we are for real. To my knowledge, none of that has been done. So I ask you, is this really a kidnapping that was motivated by trying to get money out of Savannah or whoever else? I think that is still very, very questionable. Once again, when you look at other abductions that were absolutely kidnappings, the kidnappers really, really make it clear. Because they don't want their real note to get mixed in with all of the kooks are going to come out of the woodwork, because everybody knows that happens. Also, as I was telling, the group at my table, there was me and there were 4 other people there. We had a great conversation. It was great. Very reasonable, even though certainly I know more about this stuff than any of them. We certainly had a real rational, adult, mature conversation about it. What I tried to stress to them is how rare this is. Now, kidnappings for money, not rare in South America or in Mexico. That's happening all the time. Rich families, one of their family members gets kidnapped, they get held for ransom, and then the family's forced to do that. A lot of desperate people in these countries. It happens all over the world. In the United States, it is rare. Very, very rare. Like I said, it's happened, but we have to understand how rare it is. And I think if you just keep that in mind, that can really focus your mind on seeing through the sensationalism that I think has been marketed over the past, whatever it's been, 10 days or whatever. When you start thinking about it as being rare, what you should get from that is this isn't a very popular way to make money in the United States. The reason it gets done in other countries is why it's usually successful. In the United States, it's not done a lot, even though there have been some successes. It's just not a very easy way to make money. Maybe because we have more, technology here. We take law enforcement much more seriously, on and on and on and on and on, than maybe in a lot of other countries do. So this isn't a real way to make money in the United States. So then why would somebody then choose this way? Well, maybe that person doesn't realize it. This then would start, once again, pointing us towards somebody who might be younger. But we just have to understand how rare this is. And of course, kids get abducted, but how often are real ransom demands met, brought up? How often does that happen? Like I said, with John Bennett and Benet Ramsey, that doesn't count. And plus, kidnapping an old person seems like the worst decision ever. I even think about my father. My father's 89 years old. If you want to keep this 80-something-year-old person alive long enough to get your ransom, you better take that person's medication with you. You better. I know my dad, and my dad is in pretty good shape for being 89 years old. Pretty good. But if you were to keep him away from his medication for a week, I don't know. He can't take his blood thinner medication. He can't take this. He can't take that. um, there's going to be complications. And being that she got kidnapped, it doesn't seem like they took any of her medication. Once again, this doesn't sound very sophisticated to me. In contrast to it, although it's not a kidnapping, we can think about the heist that happened in California a few years ago where all that jewelry got taken and these people I successfully pulled it off, at least for a little while. I think the jewelry is still missing though. Now that was sophisticated. They got in, they got out, nobody got hurt. No guns needed to be used. They got into that truck. And I guess the two Brinks or whatever it was, Wells Fargo or whatever it was, these guys had nothing to do with it. I mean, I don't like thieves, but if they're going to go in and they make a concerted effort to not use any violence, I'll give them credit for that. That was way more sophisticated than what we're talking about here. That, though, is way more difficult and probably harder to plan out. Those people were able to do it. This doesn't seem to be like that. You asked me about the son-in-law. This is one of those things where I think that if it was the person that close to Nancy, this would have been solved by now. If they're, it just seems to me, I realize I have a lot of criticisms for police when it comes to disappearances, but if it were something like this, whether it looks like, I think somebody wrote, gambling debt or something, we have to remember it's 10 days. 10 days, long time. She's still missing. I mean, what are we talking about here? And I don't think these are the Keystone Cops trying to solve this. I just think if it was somebody that close, that it would have been solved by now. Now, regarding the Bitcoin, let's just say that one of those ransom notes is the real one. If you're going to tell me that the real kidnapper is asking for Bitcoin, I'm just like, once again, this doesn't sound like very sophisticated to me. I know that Bitcoin, you put it however that works. You put it into the system. It can't be traced. It can be accessed anywhere. All it is, computer stuff, ones and zeros and everything. Who really would do that? My impression, despite Bitcoin and cryptocurrency and everything else, your good old-fashioned run-of-the-mill kidnapper who wants money wants cash, I think. But if the Bitcoin request is real, I think then this also means we're looking somebody that's very young. Certainly no Gen Xer is going to kidnap her and ask for Bitcoin. A 30-year-old might. A 25-year-old might. But not somebody of like my age or older. Certainly not. Even though I realize there are people who deal with that but they're not the types of people that would kidnap anybody. So it seems I just don't take it seriously. Let's see what everybody's saying here. Dee, good evening, Dee. Marcus, this is a non-family abduction. If that's your opinion, I could live with that, Marcus. I don't know if there's any facts one way or the other, but okay. Dee, when I was told there was a gambling debt, well, is that verified? I mean, how much is this gambling debt? You have to kidnap somebody to satisfy a gambling debt. Savannah is not poor. They couldn't just go to her for the money. And somebody with knowledge of the camera and the old lady's health could be. I don't know. I find it hard to believe normal kidnappers consider an old lady. Yeah. Not off till 10. All right, Gail. Thanks for letting us know exactly the medication. Kidnapping turns in really quick with old people. Marcus, are we operating off the assumption that she's deceased? All I'm saying, Marcus, is that if you're planning for a kidnapping with a ransom that's going to be a little while, I think it's a poor idea kidnapping an 84-year-old without taking her medication too. That's all I'm saying. If you want to make it easier, kidnap a 25-year-old daughter of a billionaire. Because she's probably not gonna be on any medication, and you're just gonna have to give her bread and water for some time, and she's gonna be just fine. 84-year-old, it's just very, very difficult. She could still be alive, but then I don't know all of her health conditions and everything, everything else. I just think that it's much higher odds that she's not alive, just simply for reasons of her being 84 without her medication, than having anything to do with any sort of violence. Like I stated, I don't know if all of us, even my age, I'm 55. I don't know how old all of you are, but, maybe we forget that, for me, I take some medication. I take Lipitor. If I miss it for a week, not necessarily any big deal. If I could probably go out without it for several months, given my cholesterol issues that I have, even with my cholesterol issues, I could do that, but, am I raising the risk of having some sort of heart issue or something? Yeah. But we know a lot of 80-some-year-olds with the medication, they go without it for a couple days. It can be lethal. And we just don't realize that maybe when we're younger. If we all live long enough, we'll get there. So, Rockford, also, there was blood all over the place, not to be crass, but that's not a great start to be successful kidnapping of an elderly person. The only thing I would say to that, Rockford, and by the way, hello, Rockford, how are you? She was on a blood thinner, and I know with my dad, I will tell you, I don't think he'd mind me telling anybody. Last year, his neighbor had a dog who loved them and would jump all over him. And the dog had these sharp claws. That dog, just a little slit on his arm, and it was like somebody stabbed him. So it just doesn't take a lot for somebody, because if you take a blood thinner, your skin gets really like wrinkly and stuff. Of course, you're still living. I guess it's better than nothing. But it very simply could have been that it just doesn't take a lot for a person on blood thinners to bleed. You just grab the person forcefully, and you kind of your skin up against that person's skin. The person's skin can't handle it. And yes, now for my dad, it eventually, stopped bleeding and everything else. Was he going to die from it? No. But that's my dad's condition. I don't know what her condition is. So, but you're right. If this person really knew Nancy Guthrie well, that should have been a consideration. But we know that it wasn't. So this is why I come back to where I kind of started this. This is not striking me as something that's overtly sophisticated, given the facts that we know. Now, maybe, everybody, what did Mike Tyson say? Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. So maybe the people did think about this, or person thought about this. And then once they got inside the house, it's like this popped up and that popped up. And, no good plan is my favorite saying. No good plan goes unpunished. Could be. It's just our perception right now is that it just doesn't seem to be very sophisticated. Now, you should know, I did ask Julia Colley. She's the profiler. I'm not going to tell you all the talks Julia and I have are off the record. I'll tell you what I told her. That this seems to me to be some younger person or a couple younger people, addicts, mental illness, maybe, hello, Cranky, how are you? That's the idea that comes to my mind. And so I would be thinking about the pool guy. Did she have a pool? the landscape guy, of course, anybody, is, particular people who take an interest in Jennifer Kessie's disappearance will love that I said that. Something along those lines. A younger person who knew she was home by herself, maybe a little person who, like I said, maybe doesn't see the world the rest of us the way we do. Once again, the worst thing we can, Maureen, the worst thing we can do is try to attach some logical connection to this. We do. Remember, I told you, logic, a lot of times that gets us in trouble. It gets us in trouble because we're all logical out here. We're trying to find a sensible reason. That's why I think the whole ransom thing, well, she's the daughter of a famous woman who has money, and certainly not the richest woman in the United States, but she's doing okay. So it must be that was the motivation. Could have been, but pick one. Pick one. As I told Julia, this, I know this is going to sound totally flippant, but given once again, it's anecdotal, but given what I've seen, like in my dad's community where he lives now, it's not gated or anything, but it's an over 55 living community, and they have their own clubhouse and they have their own HOA and all these things. My parents moved there the winter of 2004 into 2005. So my dad's been there over 20 years. Of course, my mother was there 13 years until she passed away. But just the weird stuff that goes on there. These beefs between older people and HOA, you can only have one bird feeder out, and and the things that my dad has kind of, gotten into with neighbors. And, my dad really just stays out of other people's business. He's a very mild-mannered guy. Really. Really, 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 really. He doesn't care if other people, are breaking the HOA rules and things and everything else. But still, even he has had a couple run-ins over the years that are just like, did that really happen? And so I don't mean to be flippant, but it could even be something as stupid as that. Was she having some beef with a neighbor and they had an argument and everything? And then, the neighbor who's also in his 80s or her 80s or something, that one of the child gets ticked off. Oh, we're going to show, she's the daughter of, we're going to show her. I mean, all you have to do is turn on YouTube and watch how road rage problems escalate from one person cutting another person off. And before you know it, bullets are flying. This is why it's dangerous to, attach some sort of logic to this. It very well could be. I hope she's alive. It gets resolved. She's abducted. The person gets caught, and it could be the most logical thing in the world. There is no guarantee of that. There's no guarantee of that. So I think that we just have to keep our minds very open. And anybody out there, whether it's on Reddit or Web Sleuths or whatever else, saying, I definitely know what happened. That's just somebody who's, let's just say overconfident to be nice. It's horrible. I know that, I'm certainly not famous like Savannah Guthrie is, but I'll be honest, I didn't even know who she was until this happened. So maybe I'm clueless. But I would admit, given the work that I've done and some of the emails I've gotten over the years and things like that, that it has crossed my mind once in a while. Well, what would happen if I really ticked some person off that got mentioned in one of my episodes, and because the person didn't think they could come after me because of where I live and other issues, what would happen if they came after my dad? And sorry, Dad, but if somebody's going to kidnap you for a ransom or something, I don't know. We'll just have to see. I'd certainly want my father to live and things, but but on the other hand, there's no guarantee when you pay a kidnapper money that you're getting the person back. And given my dad's attitude toward money and all of the stuff that he's gone through with me over the years about his paperwork and me being his executor and everything else, I'm pretty sure my dad's attitude was, don't give this person a cent. That would be my dad's attitude. Other people, parents, may be different. But I have thought about that. So, obviously, maybe with Nancy, if she was abducted and this really was, there is some real ransom demand out there and everything. And of course, her family, her kids have been out there saying, we'll pay and everything else. I'm not sure that's the way it would go in the Denzel family. I'm not so sure. Charlie says, sounds like Del Boca Vista from Seinfeld. Yeah, that does cross my mind. Hello, Sweet Berry. Cranky, this is why I limit my exposure to the outside world. Go to work, store, and maybe the beach once or twice a month. Humans are completely nuts nowadays. It's not, as somebody once said, it's not individual people, that are dangerous. It's groups of people. Any particular person is okay. It's groups that are scary. Rockford, the question is that if they keep avoiding detection, which isn't easy, contrast the Idaho murders and Tepe murders, suspect left traces with the Barraza and Dermot all still open. Yeah, there's no. Yeah, I guess what, we could also say is there's a possibility that this doesn't get solved. Being that Rockford's going to bring up Liz Barraza, and I would urge everybody to listen to the last 3 weeks of the Console podcast and the great coverage they did over there. Of course, with Missy Beavers, of course, that's coming up here. It's been what's going to be like 9 years or 10 or however long it's been. Something that seemed like it should have been solved in like days. It's still unsolved. There's really, we can't jump to conclusions regarding all of this. So that's where I am. I can't give definitive answers. I can tell you my personal insight, but I could certainly be wrong. I'm just trying to look at it from my disappearance point of view, because once again, it's just quote unquote a disappearance right now. 84-year-olds getting abducted out of their homes is as rare in the United States as rare can be. So I think the most likely reason is also going to be something that's pretty rare. I mean, if it was a business in the United States of 84-year-olds getting kidnapped for money or whatever else, it would be happening all the time. It doesn't. So we have to start looking at fringe reasons way out there on the edges of the bell curve for why this happened. That's what we have to do. And the problem is that if she ends up dead and this person gets away with it or group gets away with it, we may never know the why. Even when it comes to like the shooting in Las Vegas years ago and all those people got killed. And of course, that guy eventually was, killed himself by police. To be very technical, they've never officially released a reason why he did it. We can circumstantially say, well, maybe he was down on his luck and he was having some gambling setbacks here, but he didn't write a note. He didn't tell anybody, nothing official. So for this, if they end up getting hot on this person's trail, or once again, it very well be multiple people who did this, and it ends in some shootout somewhere and the perpetrators are killed, there's no guarantee we'll ever know why this, why it was done. Never know. So there you go. So I wanted to contrast this, kind of compare this to the abduction of Virginia Piper, and I'm just going to simply read some. So now that I've spent 40 minutes on Nancy Guthrie, let's take a look at a real kidnapping with a ransom demand. Let's do that. And maybe this will put this in a little better focus for all of us. Now, what's notable about Virginia Piper's kidnapping, this was tangential to the Watergate trial. If you've ever, or the Watergate, of course, break-in. There was, if you've ever watched All the President's Men, came out in 1976, Robert Redford, Dustin Hoffman, there is a scene where Robert Redford's character, played by, Bob Woodward, played by Robert Redford, he's calling, and he calls this guy's name is Kenneth Dahlberg, who was a real person. And Kenneth Dahlberg, in the middle of this conversation, says, I can't talk right now. My neighbor's wife has been kidnapped. I mean, some of you remember that from that movie. This is the neighbor's wife, Virginia Piper. If you're wondering, that was not made up in the movie. That happened. So here we go. So on July 27th of 1972, I was on the verge of turning 2 years old. Virginia Lewis Piper, nicknamed Ginny, Ginny, was handcuffed and blindfolded by two armed masked men inside of her home. Her husband, Harry Piper, was a prominent Twin Cities in Minnesota investment banker. Both Bobby and Virginia were active members of the Twin Cities business community, or were active in social, philanthropic, and civic affairs. They lived in Lake Minnetonka. And the belief is that when these kidnappers, two of them showed up there, they were actually looking for her husband to kidnap him, but he wasn't there. So the intruders likely intended to abduct Bobby Piper, but instead handcuffed her and took her. The kidnappers left a ransom note addressed to family, which demanded $1 million in unmarked $20 bills with precise instructions for delivery. This was the most expensive demand the FBI to that point had ever seen. The FBI immediately became involved. However, Bobby, ignoring the advice of the Bureau, delivered the money, 50,000 20s in a duffel bag weighing 110 pounds on the next Friday night. Bobby followed the instructions of the kidnappers. He was doing this against the FBI's recommendation. Driving a circuitous route, meaning they were telling him to drive all over the place, no in particular direction, probably making sure he wasn't being followed. Parking behind a seedy bar and trying to make a phone call. While in the bar, the ransom was almost certainly removed from his car. Bobby did not see who took the money or learn the whereabouts of his wife. The Saturday morning, the next morning, an unidentified man called a local clergyman and told him the location of Ginny Piper. The FBI then recovered her from a heavily wooded area in Jay Cook State Park. She was wet, hungry, exhausted, and traumatized, but physically unharmed, not raped or anything. She was then flown back to the Twin Cities. So there was a big investigation, of course, into who did this. The FBI manhunt involved hundreds of agents across the country, investigating more than 1,000 people of interest, spending tens of millions of dollars of the taxpayers' money, making it one of the most extensive manhunts in FBI history. 16 days before the expiration date of the 5-year statute of limitations on kidnapping, and yes, there is a statute of limitations on kidnapping. So 16 days before this was to expire in 1977, two Twin Cities men, Kenneth Callahan and Donald Larson, were arrested and charged. Tried in a federal courtroom, Callahan and Larson were prosecuted and defended by a prominent lawyer. A jury found the two men guilty, but the verdict was overturned on appeal. A second trial occurred 2 years after the first, so now we're to 1979. And the defendants were found not guilty. So technically, whoever kidnapped Virginia Piper have never answered for their crime. They got away with it. Whether it was these guys or who was somebody else, whoever it was got away with it. Now you're wondering about the money. I'm going to talk about that. Now, of course, the FBI claims that the second jury was mistaken. The FBI continues to insist that Larson and Callahan were it. Only were the perpetrators of this. Only about $4,000 of that ransom was ever found. The bills were marked. And they turned up in banks in Owatonna, Rochester, Austin, Quezon, and Dodge Center in Minnesota. But who put that money there? Nobody knows. But the rest of that, all the rest of that $1 million, never found. And my guess is, given the way, the Secret Service could be involved in this, is too, because they do counterfeiting investigations. They keep records of the serial numbers for these dollars. Seemingly none of them, the rest of the money, has ever turned up in American circulation since the ransom was paid in 1972. So practically for almost my entire life, none of that money has ever popped up again, at least not in the United States. But even if whoever did this went to another country, let's say that they went to Europe and lived the high life spending those dollars, the thing is, those dollars would eventually make their way back to the United States, because you go over there, you have to exchange the dollars for, I don't know, lira. Of course, this would be before the European Union, so the euro didn't exist. So Deutschmarks or the pound or francs or whatever else. And eventually those American dollars make their way back to the United States. That's how the Lufthansa heist happened. That's talked about in the movie Goodfellas. None of that money has ever made it back to the United States if it was even spent in another country. Is this fascinating or what? I think Virginia Piper and her husband, went to live their lives. Of course, they're both deceased now. So if you ever watched All the President's Men from 1976 and you see that scene, hear about that scene, you see that scene with Kenneth Dahlberg and he's talking about his neighbor's wife being abducted. This is that case. And so, to me, and I'll read, the kidnapping received national attention for several reasons: the prominence of the victim and her husband, the time it was done in broad daylight, the location, a large opulent estate, the time of the arrest of the two men eventually charged with the crime, like just days before the statute of limitations was up, their acquittal on appeal in 1979, and the fact that only $4,000 of the ransom the kidnappers received was ever recovered. Now, if you ask me, Virginia Piper, once again, not as old as Nancy Guthrie, but certainly not a 20-year-old either. I don't see any similarity between the kidnapping of this older woman and the kidnapping of Nancy Guthrie, even though it's prominent families and everything else. I don't see a lot of similarities. And you have to remember, this kidnapping with the ransom, this was over in a matter of a few days. If this had happened now, it would, at the same time that Nancy Guthrie went missing, all of this would have been done by now. She would have been kidnapped. Her husband put up the ransom. The ransom money got taken by somebody, and she would have already been found alive. If this happened now, in the same day that Nancy Guthrie went missing. But here we have Nancy Guthrie still missing. And I guess you could say this was a successful kidnapping. Even if those two guys, Callahan and Larson, did it, essentially they got away with it. And of course, the money has never been found. Somehow somebody put that money somewhere. Maybe they burned it when they found out that it was all marked or something. I don't know. like the Joker did in the second of the Christopher Nolan Batman movies, not to ruin it for anybody. To me, this doesn't seem like Nancy Guthrie's disappearance at all. Let's see what we have all talked about Pizzagate and how the Epstein files and how my times Savannah G was in it. Let's not get into that, D, please. Let's not do that. Cranky, the internet protects no one. We can type in anyone's name and get info on them. Old and current addresses, past criminal records. Just found Nancy's address on white page. It's so easy. I know. The question is, Cranky, would anybody know that she was Savannah Guthrie's daughter? You should know. With the work, of course, that I do, and trying to track down people from years ago and everything, you start to realize that a lot of names that you think are unique aren't. They aren't. And, unless you're looking for Ed Densel, which if you do a search for me, you're going to find my dad and maybe a distant cousin who I don't even know or something. But it's just not a big time name, not just in the United States, but on the entire earth. But Nancy Guthrie, fairly common name. Now, I realize Nancy kind of as a woman's name is falling a little out of favor. I don't know how many parents these days are naming their daughters Nancy. But there are a lot of Nancy Guthries over the age of 50. So how do you narrow it down that she's the one unless you really put some work into it? Not to mention a lot of these people use a program like Delete Me and things that, wipe out their information. I've, of course, encountered that in the work that I do. So I get what you're saying, Cranky. It's just somebody would really have to go through an elimination process to get the right Nancy Guthrie. And you'd think that would leave a digital trail somewhere. Maybe. Rockford, maybe Lem burned it with American money. Lem burned it with the Armenian money train loot from the Shield. Yes, I know it. Wow, I forgot all about that. And the funny thing is all I do is read that sentence like, oh, yeah, I remember that. Right, Rockford. What a fantastic show. So this is how I go about doing this. I don't know, and other people, they have their podcasts and shows and everything. I mean, how many of them have really tried to compare her disappearance to other shore ransom schemes? I don't know. It just seemed natural to me, but maybe not to other people. So I have my doubts that this is, I guess what I'm saying is it just doesn't seem like a ransom thing to me. And maybe the most obvious point is what I already said before about the ransom demands. Going back, let's even maybe look at it this way, being that something that we all know a lot better. The Zodiac Killer. I'm sure most of you have seen the movie, even though the movie has takes some artistic license and everything else. You shouldn't watch that movie and think that is gospel on the Zodiac Killer and everything. There are a lot of liberties taken. And even if you read the book, the actual Zodiac book by Robert Graysmith, I've listened to it, so I know what I'm talking about. He takes some liberties too, even though he says that everything he wrote in there is factual. The fact is, there isn't not a lot of strong evidence that Arthur Lee Allen was the Zodiac Killer. But the main point I'm trying to make with the Zodiac Killer is, of course, he wrote notes to police. He said to police, to the San Francisco Chronicle, the Examiner, and all these different newspapers and everything else. And what was one of the main points he wanted to make sure they understood? I am the real killer. He wanted them to know this wasn't some, kook who was, trying to just get attention, wasn't the real kook, real murderer. Whoever the Zodiac killer was, maybe still alive now or is. When he wrote those notes, he wanted everybody to know, yeah, this is me. This is not some fraud. This is me. It doesn't sound like any of these notes, whether it's about Bitcoin or anything else, that any of them have that kind of transparency. So there's that. So this is something that we have to figure into this. You know, you're not going to get your money if you can't overtly prove that you are the real kidnappers. Lurch, regarding the monk's money, I believe they are not tracked forever. It requires effort on many parts to find. People forget the Treasury doesn't check bills. Okay. Before direction. Okay. Lurch. But they obviously do it for a time. Maybe Lurch, you're probably right. Maybe it's a little much to ask that they're doing it 55 years later or 53 years later or however, 54 years later. Certainly. Sure, I can go with that. I can agree with that. But obviously they did a little bit of it. And in the Wikipedia doesn't say, when that money was found to be in those accounts and all of that. That certainly would be helpful information. Certainly. But they certainly did it for a time. I mean, is somebody going to be that patient with $1 million or whatever it is? Usually these people want to spend it as fast as they can because they may be thinking I'm going to get caught. But your point is well taken, Lurch. Thank you so much. D, well, that's why I have to ask questions to you and others. I can understand stuff quicker. All right, D, I think you do a fine job understanding stuff. But do you think the notes are real? I'm not convinced they are now. Like I stated, it just doesn't sound to me like these notes have the kind of authenticity that we are used to seeing in other situations like this, like Virginia Piper, like the Zodiac Killer, where people go out of their way to really, really prove it. Doesn't sound like this has happened. Rawford, some killers create confusion by setting fires, other by creating crime scenes in separate jurisdictions. Maybe the ransom is a similar tactic. Maybe it's somebody who has written the notes, but it was just a straight out abduction for other reasons. And they're trying to make it look like something else to confuse. Maybe that seems like a lot of work though. Maybe, since he was, first was sent to TMZ. Yeah. That doesn't help things either, D. Although I would admit that I go to TMZ, once in a while, because to be honest, I'd rather much read what's going on there than ever go to any of the news channels, just to be honest with you. So there you go. That is what I have to say about Nancy Guthrie, and then comparing her to a case, an incident that was a real ransom demand. I don't see a lot of similarities. But that was 50 some years ago. Maybe things have changed. maybe the attitude of kidnappers and ransom, that whatever is done has changed. But I'm not so sure. All right. I'm now going to go and talk about tonight's disappearance, just straight out disappearance, although maybe this was something foul play nature too. And that is the disappearance of Anthony Fox. Now, I'm wondering how many of you know who even Anthony Fox is and why I might have picked his disappearance. His disappearance is one that I've known about for a while. And I will even tell you that early on in Unfound's existence, I tried to find somebody in his family to talk to have them on. I was unsuccessful at doing that. Maybe I should put that on my list of things to do here now in 2026. But what you need to know about Anthony Fox before I get into this is that he had a connection to the actor Johnny Depp. And Anthony Fox's name came up when Johnny Depp was going through all of that with Amber Heard, of course, the allegations she made against him, and it was found to be defamatory and everything else. Maybe some of you even watched that trial and Johnny Depp up on the stand. Anthony Fox and his disappearance while being connected business-wise to Johnny Depp came up in all of that. So now I'm going to take a look at Anthony Fox's disappearance and analyze it, as I've been doing since like last summer, just for disappearances that I just randomly pick out. So I'm going to read the page from the Charlie Project, and then I'm going to, of course, go through some, questions that I still have. You should know that some other productions blogs have looked at his disappearance, but really, not a ton of information. Of course, no additional facts have come out about his disappearance in years. He went missing in 2001. All right. Anthony was last seen in Ventura County, which is in Southern California, on December 19th of 2001. His pickup disappeared with him, and a .38 caliber revolver disappeared from his briefcase at the same time. On January 6th, so roughly, let's see, the 12 and 6, 18, 2.5 weeks later, his truck was found abandoned on Chestnut Street in Santa Clara, California. Of course, Santa Clara is up near San Francisco. In fact, I think Santa Clara is where the Super Bowl was just played, right? That's Santa Clara. Somebody want to correct me on that. So far away from where he's last seen. He was a resident of Southern California. His truck is found in Northern California. And it was just sitting on this street. I don't know the condition of it or anything. I'll get into that later. Mr. Fox left behind several $1,000s in his bank account, and there hasn't been activity on his financial accounts since his disappearance. He had a teenage daughter at the time he was divorced. Fox was scheduled to testify in court shortly after his disappearance. In fact, I think it was the next day. So the day after he went missing, he was supposed to be in court in a deposition, and he was in the process of suing 5 people over financial problems at his business, a West Hollywood nightclub called the Viper Room. I'm sure some of you have heard that. Maybe most famously, that is where River Phoenix overdosed and died. He was part owner of that place at the time, along with Johnny Depp and others. Anthony Fox was in the process of suing Johnny Depp and others due to financial problems. He said that they had ripped him off, and they had all become business partners in the Viper Room in 1993. So, and he goes missing 8 years later. The club was frequented by Hollywood celebrities, and as I just stated, and gained notoriety when the actor River Phoenix died of a drug overdose just outside of it on Halloween in 1993. So right after they took ownership of this place, River Phoenix dies there. I remember that like it was yesterday. Depp was one of the defendants in Fox's lawsuit. Fox had accused Depp of defrauding him of millions of dollars in profits from the business. Fox went missing before the lawsuits could be brought to any conclusion. So he goes missing in 2001. In 2004, 3 years later, Depp turned over his share in the nightclub to Fox's daughter, who resold it. So she got possession of his part, and then she sold the whole thing. The current owners are Darren Feinstein and Harry Morton, son of Hard Rock Cafe founder Peter Morton. It is unclear what caused Fox to vanish, or whether the Viper Room or the pending litigation had anything to do with his disappearance. His case remains unsolved. So, right, I'm just wondering how many is this ringing a bell for any of you? I know many of you are very schooled disappearance people. Were you aware that one of the owners of the Viper Room went missing? Are you aware that there was somebody connected to Johnny Depp who went missing? any of you at all? If not, I'm glad to inform you, but this is the work that I do. I just, happen upon these things. So now what's the first thing that caught my attention in preparing to talk about this tonight is that there are 0 articles on newspapers.com about any of this. Not when he went missing, not when his truck was found, not with the Viper Room being sold, nothing. 0. Now, of course, newspapers.com does not have copies of every newspaper that existed back in 2001. But given that the owner of a well-known club goes missing and his connection to Johnny Depp, you'd think that that would be something. I guess not. As I already stated, when the Amber Heard trial happened, how many years ago? Very, somewhat recently. There was a private investigator on her side of the case that looked into this. And you know what I think about private investigators. But this person, this person's best guess was that Anthony Fox had faked his own death. That was the best guess at the time. Like I said, though, just a few years ago. I'm not sure that any independent or private investigator looked at his disappearance back in 2001, 2002. I have no idea. But when it came to this trial, and of course, she's defending herself, and they're trying to make Johnny Depp look as bad as possible. And I'm not even going to get into who was right and who was wrong and all of that. But you can see why Amber Heard might have been motivated to try to show that maybe Johnny Depp or his people had something to do with Anthony's disappearance. It makes all the sense in the world. I mean, you got to try anything, not saying that that's what happened. Now, what's interesting, though, is, like I said, he went missing like the day before he was supposed to give his deposition or whatever it was. The important part is that his side of won. It was eventually proven that fraud had happened, and had he not gone missing, that he would have collected something. So it was not a situation where he was the one being sued and he was going to lose, and thus he said, I have to get the hell out of here. That's not what happened. So you have to keep that in mind. Rockford is a proud member of the Ventura County chapter of Unfound's fan club. Thank you. Yes, I've heard of it. Last seen in the city of Ventura, I believe, just down the road from me. There you go, Rockford. See, thinking of you, Rockford, on this disappearance. So judge eventually ruled that yes, Fox had been defrauded. Viper Room sold his daughter, as I've already stated, and then she got to sell it. Now, whether she made any money on it, what she's doing these days, I have no idea. I do remember trying to track her down back in 2016, 2017, unsuccessfully. Given that I'm much better tracking people down and everything to talk to these days, maybe I should give that another shot. I want to remind you that it's a long way, at least driving, from LA, Ventura County, up to Santa Clara. You should know that the Chestnut Street, I did look at Chestnut Street, went down, did a Google Street View. Nothing overtly special about it. It's kind of near San Francisco Bay, but it's not like the street is like right next to the water where, he could have jumped out and just jumped off a bridge or something like this. It's not near the Golden Gate Bridge. Nothing like that. Just seems like just a random street up there. He did send a letter to his mother maybe a month before all this happened. The content of that is unknown. His mother is a character. Anthony did come from money, and I'm going to get into it eventually, but he was not an American citizen. He was a British citizen. And he had multiple money problems over the years that seems his mother had bailed him out of those. And people who knew Anthony stated that he would have been comfortable living off the grid in an RV. But On the other hand, you wouldn't think that a part owner in the Viper Room would be an off the grid RV type of guy. So I don't know if I can buy into that. That's something that somebody said, maybe just because they're just trying to, maybe they just had the idea that he did run off and they're going to say that just to reinforce their own theory. It's not actually factual. That happens all the time. He had an ex-wife, I think the mother of his daughter, who claimed that she saw him in 2002, so the next year, and that she was in Northern California and she was at a bookstore and she just happened to run into him, and that he ran off. He got into a white Honda or something. She got the license plate, turned it into police, and it was eventually they tracked who had that license plate, and it was some woman. I guess they could not make any connection between this woman and Anthony Fox. So I don't know if I'm supposed to believe this ex-wife or not. I need to hear a whole heck of a lot more about that before I could buy into it being even close to true. I would also say, once again, my impression of Anthony Fox, reading about him, knowing what his business was and everything, he doesn't seem like the type of guy who's going to be sitting in a bookstore reading a book. To me, that's the opposite of somebody, who's living off the grid in an RV. And then also the opposite of some guy who wants to be involved in running the hottest club on Sunset Boulevard or wherever it is in Hollywood. So there's just something about this sighting, and you know how I feel about sightings anyway, that doesn't seem real to me, but we're covering this disappearance and I'm obligated to tell you that. So those are some additional facts. I think that, there was it Radar or Online that did a long article about all this several years ago. I think I got some of that additional information from there. So the questions that are still in my mind that I couldn't find in getting ready for tonight's show, some things that, once again, I just things that are on my mind after reading all of this. Where was he supposed to be on the day that he disappeared? We know where he was supposed to be the next day. What was he supposed to be doing that day? Where was he going? Who saw him last? What did he say? Did he say, oh, I'm going to the gym, I'm going to the Viper Room, I'm going to see Johnny, I'm going to the beach? Any kind of comments like that at all? We know that the gun is missing. Is there anything else missing? I'm guessing he took his wallet with him. What was it in the truck? I guess the gun wasn't in the truck. What was found in the truck? What also was missing? We don't have any information like that. And of course, we know how helpful those things can be to be understanding a disappearance. What's missing, what's left behind, what's found in somebody's car, what's not found in the car, all of that. We surely. Hello, Glenn. What are you doing tonight? Good to see you. Fantastic you being here. There's a very good documentary on Hulu about the Viper Room, but they never mentioned this. Yeah. I guess that should tell us the quality of that documentary, Glenn. Thank you for including that. Maybe people can find it on Hulu if they want to watch it. What was done when people discovered he was missing? Who noticed he was missing first? Was it that because he didn't show up for the trial or the deposition, whatever it was the next day? Was that like the big red flag that everybody thought, uh-oh, something's wrong? Or did it happen before that? Certainly, I don't think probably happened after that. It either happened when he was supposed to be there and wasn't, or something before that. Did his daughter get up the next morning, for example, and he wasn't there? This would be helpful. Certainly helpful. Being that the truck ended up in Northern California, that's a little bit of a drive, and trucks generally don't get great gas mileage. When did he get gas the last before he went missing? And is there any idea about him getting gas on the way up there? Did he take cash? Do we know anything about that? Was his computer searched, either his home computer or the computer at the Viper Room? Did anybody even bother to do any of that? Now, they did mention that there was an answering machine at his house that got glossed over, that it should have been saved, should have been put into evidence or whatever, and wasn't, whether it got taken away or the messages got erased or something. But it is noted that the answering machine he had at home was not checked. Did anybody, for example, it'd be notable if there was a message for anybody, it doesn't have to be Johnny Depp, anybody. Hey, Anthony, meet me here. I think that might be important, but we'll never know now. Cell phone info, nothing's written about it, but this is 2001. This is California. It's reasonable for me to believe that a lot of people in Southern California in 2001 had cell phones, even though this was, before the smartphone era, years before the first iPhone and all of that. But still, I know working at Star Trek in 2001, there were coworkers of mine who had the old Nokia phones and everything. And being that he was in business, he's in LA, he's doing business on the Sunset Strip and all that. It seems reasonable to me that he would have a cell phone, but maybe he didn't. But I'd like to know about the cell phone info, if even only just did he have one? Was there anything unusual about the truck? It's parked on the street. Was it parked in front of somebody's house, or, was it an abandoned lot? I don't know. Of course, a big question, did he know anybody up there? Probably did. Is that noteworthy or not? Did he know anybody in Santa Clara? I'm guessing they looked into that. And I understand probably a lot of these things were thought of at the time. The problem is, we as the public, there's no information out about any of this. I'm not saying that none of these questions maybe are necessarily mind-blowing, but the answers to them are not public. So this is why I'm putting it all out there. We also have to think about, if he chose and ran off like this private investigator says, why didn't he completely just ditch the truck? If he was like, you know what, I'm not going through this deposition, it's too much pressure, I don't think I'm going to win, even though he technically did end up winning. And I'm going to go change my name to John Smith, and I'm going to move to Florida and everything else. Why did he not? I mean, if you really, 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 really want to make it a mystery, why didn't he just ditch the truck? There are a lot of aqueducts and lakes and everywhere else that you could ditch a truck in California. Now, maybe if you're going to Nevada, that gets a little more difficult because you have Lake Mead and that's about it. Or, if you're going to Arizona, you might have the Colorado River. But in California, you have your whole water system, starting way up there in Northern California. Got a lot of places you could have ditched a truck into the water, maybe never be found. He leaves it on a city street. He had to know that eventually it was going to be found. Sitting on a city street. Granted, it's far away from LA, but still. And likewise, if he really wanted to fake his own death, the Golden Gate Bridge is right there. He could have gone, ditched the truck there. And you know what people would have thought? Oh, he went out on the bridge and jumped. So these are burning questions for me as I look at this disappearance as it sits. So what is my analysis? First of all, could this be foul play? There are no facts to dispute it, but I would say that He's in Southern California. He lives there. His business partners are that. His job, his work is there. The Viper Room is there, and everything else. That seems like a lot of work to kill somebody and then ditch their truck up near San Francisco, when you really wouldn't have to do that. You could have ditched the car anyway and, down in Skid Row in LA. That would have been good enough. You don't have to drive it to San Francisco. And I think people would understand that, I think. And likewise, as I stated before, if you really, really want to get away with it, you ditch the truck. You make it so the truck most likely isn't going to be found. Yet it was found. It wasn't found right away, but so it seems unlikely that this was a murder, whether Johnny Depp had anything to do with it or anybody else. It just seems overtly unlikely. So what then we're talking about is, as I guess, this private investigator for Amber Heard decided, is that this guy faked his own death, or I'm not even sure it's that, because there's, when you say, once again, fake your own death, that means you're actually trying to make it look like you're dead. Like, I think some years ago, maybe the last 10, 15 years, there was the guy who took off in a plane. I think it was in the Eastern United States somewhere. And he jumped out of the plane and allowed the plane to crash. And he tried to make it look like he died in the plane crash or something. And of course, it was, it was a fiasco and he got caught. And then much more recently, we know the guy who faked his death or whatever with the canoe or the kayak or whatever. And he went to Canada and he fell in love with someone from Kazakhstan. Remember all that within the last few years? That's faking your death. This is not. Now, granted, he took a gun, but to me, as a gun owner myself, that really doesn't seem to be a very convincing, idea of, faking your own death. I took a gun. He took a gun, so he faked his own death. What more likely it makes me think is this is maybe actually a real death. If you're going to take the gun, then what are you doing with it? Maybe for protection. You're going on the run. You're changing your name, and who knows what you're going to run into. Maybe you're going to have to live on the streets for a while and you want to protect yourself. Okay. But this doesn't seem like a faking his own death type of thing. It seems more like a running off situation where maybe death is not on his mind at all. So then we have to start thinking at like maybe a disappearance like Kenneth Playstead, who surely ran off. Now, of course, with him, he tried to make it look like somebody attacked him. Remember, the car door was open and his hat was on the ground. And, maybe Heather Grotman, that was like a year. By the way, Heather's coming back to Unfound in March for another appearance. But of course, that's almost a year ago now that we talked about that. And Rockford, also interesting that Ventura isn't that close to LA. Did he live there? It's about 60, 70 miles to downtown LA. I don't know. Suppose we could go back and find out what his address was at the time. And in fact, Rockford, I'm pretty sure I did that when I was attempting to find somebody in his family. I just don't remember where it was, where he was living. I don't remember. But so we're thinking about a Kenneth Playstead. And as we know, I'm not inclined to think Kenneth Playstead killed himself. Certainly he ran off with some money and certainly had it all planned and everything. He got away with it. Kenneth Playstead is surely not alive now. He got away with it. He died without anybody figuring out where he went. Kind of like Mary Jane Van Gilder. And I was actually yesterday at the Super Bowl when we were talking about Nancy Guthrie, and I started talking about the work that I do. That I told them about that case. They were just like fascinated. I said, you should check out my podcast. So you can do it. If Mary Jane Van Gilder could do it in 1945 and Kenneth Playstead could do it. What was that? Way back in, what was the 60s or 70s, when it's a while ago. If he can do it too, then I guess in 2001, Anthony Fox could do this. So I'm not inclined, I've already said, I'm inclined to not believe the sighting, as I've already stated. The guy doesn't sound like a sit in a bookstore and read type of guy. And of course, then we also have to think, what are the odds of her running into him and everything? I'm not inclined to believe that, but that's pretty common for me. The tough part to understand about all this is that he eventually won the lawsuit, and his daughter ended up getting Johnny Depp's piece of the business, and she sold it. I hope she made a nice buck on it. So that's the hard part to understand. The big question is, in the moment in 2001 when he went missing, could he have made that prediction? That's unclear. Of course, you never know how these things are going to go. And maybe he thought, I'm going to lose anyway, and why bother? Whereas maybe if it was a much more clear-cut situation and he thought he could win, then, maybe he doesn't choose. Most likely, if I'm going to get full ownership of this hot place and I'm going to be making money and I don't have to share it with anybody, I think that would be a good reason to stick around. But we also have to understand he already had financial problems in the past, wasn't good with money. Sounds to me like he was a little bit of a mama's boy. And my experience with that is mama's boys usually do have problems with money. But having had other financial problems, then why did he run away from this one? Hard to understand. But it did say that he had gone missing before for a little while. And I think that he was eventually found living with some woman. And maybe that's where, the ex-wife is, trying to create that scene again. He was with this woman and this license plate, maybe. But he had financial problems before, whether, failed businesses or maybe had a gambling problem, drug problem. I don't know. I think what also we have to remember is I think that if you're a non-citizen in the United States, it's easier to disappear than if you are a citizen. In fact, I would even make that an argument now. Because you have to remember, when you start looking at these online databases that myself and others use to try to track down people, find phone numbers, find email addresses and everything, it's pretty much only citizens of the United States. So you could be a non-citizen and there really wouldn't be any records of you here in the United States. And you might get away with never, you have to pay taxes if you work here, maybe I don't know that. But it would be easier. Surely be easier, I think, as a non-citizen. And especially being that he's British and maybe there's no language barrier and everything. He's just, he just shows up one day in Texas with his British accent, and all the Texans are like, oh, look at this British guy, not knowing who he really is. Could have easily gone to Canada if he's British. We have to remember back then at the time, even though this was after 9/11, you could get into Canada without a passport. You can't do that now. I remember those good old days when you could do that. Now, if you go to Canada, you better have your passport and you better be ready to answer all sorts of questions. And the funny thing is, even when you're coming back from Canada as an American citizen, they all still ask you a lot of questions. They're suspicious as hell of you. His mother died some years later, and he was actually in her will. She had money. He was supposed to get money, never turned up. It's hard to believe he'd pass up that money. His mother died. Like I said, I think it was just a few years later, maybe 2004 or something. So I guess you could believe that he was deceased at that point. And we also have to think, it's not clear to me why he would stay missing. Because it doesn't sound like there were any warrants out for his arrest, even though he had money problems and everything. He wasn't a criminal. So maybe that's hard to understand. Important. No warrants, unlike Kenneth Playstead, who, of course, did rip somebody off. And I also might even be open to the idea, was the Santa Clara parking of the truck a misdirection? Did he ditch it there? Yeah, I saw that. Thank you, D. Probably not the time to tell me that. That's probably just reserved for sending me a message. You could do that way, but I appreciate it. Was this some sort of misdirection? That, all right, I'm going to, run out of my life and I'm going to make it look like I went to San Francisco. And so then I'm going to ditch the truck out there. But really what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back to LA and maybe change my look, being I'm comfortable with this area or something. Possible. Risky. I'm guessing because of his, living, being part of the LA scene, the Hollywood scene, probably a lot of people knew him. Never knew who you could run into, but I could be open to the idea that there was some sort of misdirection play. Maybe it didn't have anything to do with going back to LA. He wanted people to think he went to San Francisco when really he went to Las Vegas. Could be. Let's see. Rockford says, you haven't covered this case, but it's similar to the disappearance of Tom Roach, a Burbank resident last seen there after work. Remains later found way up near San Francisco. Real head scratcher. Not maybe the name's familiar, Rockford, but that's about it. D. Okay, D, thank you. Yeah, I got you, D. Thanks. You can tell me more about it in Messenger. So overall, I'm not convinced this was a suicide. This guy seems a little too into himself and a little too arrogant and everything else to really, truly believe that he committed suicide. He might have died, maybe from misadventure or an accident or cancer or something, but this is not giving me a suicide idea at all. If you really wanted to do that, why didn't you just go park at the Golden Gate Bridge and just get it, do it that way? This also, though, doesn't seem to me like this is fake. He was really, really, really trying to make people think that he was dead. Unless there was some signs of violence at his home that could have been staged or something. I don't see that either. It's also, overall, also the suicide issue is hard to understand because he had problems like this before and didn't commit suicide. And it's also clear to me that I think in this situation, his mother would have bailed him out if it had asked. I guess he didn't. So I'm open to the idea that the previous incidents, like with money problems, and like I said, he went missing once before. Could this have been practice for a permanent disappearance? Did he learn something from those other times that he finally applied this time and, went the whole way with it? The problem with this is not going to be like a Mary Jane Van Gilder issue or even a Kenneth Play. This is going to be more like Kenneth Playstead. We have to remember Anthony Fox was 53 years old. So the odds of him running off, starting a new life, meeting somebody, having more kids, and then one of those kids putting their DNA, not knowing who their real father is, and he ran away, that, through 23andMe or whatever companies are still in business or Othram, not likely. Same way with Kenneth Playstead. Of course, we would have had to wait a long time for that, but not likely. And I would also remind everybody, he is now 77. He would be now 77 years old. And, of course, the average man in the United States lives to be 72. Could he still be alive now? Yeah. What's his family tree like for cancer and everything else? But I would say he's probably likely not alive. So I think, the thinking now in 2026, if I were putting odds, I think the biggest odds is that he just left his life and started a new one somewhere. But it's not like living off the grid in an RV or anything. I think he just liked to play around with money and stuff. And maybe he finally found something that he was good at and successful at and didn't have any more problems. And that's the way he's been able to avoid being tracked down. And like I said, it would certainly help that he's he's not an American citizen. Rockford, more like a Hoagland, perhaps. Enjoyed the Found episode, by the way. You're welcome, Rockford. Yeah, something along those lines seems plausible. Just kind of went, although I think that Robert Hoagland was a different type of guy, and he didn't mind living a low-key life and renting and paying cash and all of that. Anthony Fox strikes me as not being able to be that low-key. So, but somehow, if he's still out there, even alive, he's avoided being detected. But I don't see a murder. I don't think that Johnny Depp, I think all that stuff is crazy. Even though I understand they had to look at it. I don't necessarily blame Amber Heard and her team for looking into it. Suicide doesn't seem likely. Fake death, there's no proof of that. I think this guy just said, you know what? I think I've had enough of this. He just changed his name to John Smith or something. It's the best I can do with the information provided. So I hope you found that all interesting. I urge you to look up Anthony Fox if you've not heard about his disappearance before. Look it up for yourself and tell me what you think happened. The only one more thing I want to mention before I get to this Friday's episode, more information on Yesenia Norman. Of course, I talked about her last Monday. That was supposed to be the Unfound Now episode, but she was unfortunately found deceased. They did track the guy down. She was found in a particular guy's apartment, and they were able to track him down in Louisiana. And he has now been taken back to Arizona to face charges for Yesenia's murder. I have been told how it was done, and I'm not getting into it. I will just tell you that it was particularly gruesome. This was not like a strangling. This was not a gunshot. Pretty horrible. So very, very sad. But they have that guy in custody, and hopefully he can go to jail for the rest of his life. So let's get to this Friday. I told you already that it's going to be a 3-parter. I think it deserves it because in this interview, we talk about some things that have never been discussed. Items that surrounding a disappearance that surely have never been discussed on Unfound before, despite almost 400 disappearances now. And that is the disappearance of Melissa Trumpy. Trumpy, not related to the president, of course. Melissa Trumpy, she went missing on October 26th, 2021, the day after my mother's birthday, from Shannon, Illinois, although actually she was a resident of Wisconsin. And the interview is with her ex-boyfriend, father of 2 of her children. His name is Benny. He is not at all a suspect in her disappearance. In fact, surely in this episode, you're going to hear how much Benny still cares for Melissa, even though he had to part ways with her because of all the issues that Melissa had. You're going to certainly hear it. It's very sad. And they have 2 kids together. He does a spectacular interview, but you're going to hear about hostage situations and SWAT teams and an airfield. And like I said, we just go into some territory just when you think that maybe we've covered everything there is to say about disappearances. We find some new things. But it's going to be a 3-parter. It was a long interview. I think it deserved it. So be prepared for that this Friday. It's going to be a part 1, part 2, part 3, all coming out on Friday. So if you want to start looking that up, Melissa Trumpy, Trumpy, October 26, 2021. Shannon, Illinois, interview with her ex-father of two of her kids. His name is Benny. I think that's the first Benny we've had on Unfound. That's all I have for you tonight. I hope you enjoyed it, found it informative, learned some things tonight. I hope you enjoyed my insight. Maybe you think I'm crazy. That's fine too. I want to tell all of you to keep your heads on swivels out there. Do not become victims. Do not end up on my podcast. Charlie, I want you to say hi to your boys for me. And I will be, of course, thinking about your father in particular. That's all I have for tonight. Thanks for making time on this Monday night. Good night.